You wake up, check your phone because everyone does, scroll through social media because that is what people do in the morning. Get dressed in clothes that fit current acceptable styles, go to work at a job you chose partly because it seemed respectable, order the popular coffee drink, and make small talk using phrases everyone uses. At what point in this day did you make a choice that was genuinely yours? This is not a question about rebellion or non-conformity for its own sake. This is a question about something far more unsettling, whether the person you think you are is actually you at all, or whether you have become a kind of placeholder, a human-shaped space filled with the expectations, habits, opinions and choices of no one in particular and everyone in general. Martin Heidegger called this way of being the they-self, and he believed it was not just a phase we go through, but the default mode of human existence, the gravitational pull from which we must constantly escape or risk losing ourselves entirely. The they-self, das Man in German, is not about peer pressure or social influence in the simple sense we usually understand these terms. It is far more radical and disturbing than that. Heidegger argued that most of us, most of the time, do not exist as ourselves at all. We exist as they, as the anonymous collective voice of acceptable behaviour, normal opinion and public interpretation. We become what one does, what one thinks, what one says, without ever asking who this one actually is. Part 1. What exactly is the they-self? To understand the they-self, we must first grasp what Heidegger meant by authentic existence, because the they-self is precisely the loss of authenticity. For Heidegger, to exist authentically means to own your existence, to take responsibility for who you are and the choices you make, to live in a way that comes from your own understanding of what it means to be you. Authenticity is not about being unique or different. It is about being genuinely yourself in whatever you do, even if what you do looks ordinary from the outside. The key is whether you have chosen it and owned it, or whether you are simply doing it because that is what one does. The they-self is the opposite of this. It is a mode of existence where you hand over your being to an anonymous collective authority that Heidegger calls the they or the one. When you exist as the they-self, your opinions are not really your opinions, they are what people generally think. Your choices are not your choices, they are what is normally done. Your understanding of yourself is not based on genuine self-examination, but on how one is supposed to be. You become a kind of empty vessel that simply channels the averaged-out, levelled-down, public way of existing. But here is what makes this concept so philosophically powerful and disturbing. The they is nobody. You cannot point to the they and say, there it is, that specific person or institution controlling me. The they is not your parents, not the government, not social media, not any particular force, though all of these can be expressions of it. The they is the anonymous, dispersed, nowhere and everywhere voice of what is acceptable, normal and expected. When you say one should dress this way, or people think this about that, or everyone knows this is how things are done, you are speaking the voice of the they. But if someone asks who these people are, who this one is, you cannot answer because the they has no specific identity. This is why the they self is so insidious and hard to escape. If it were a specific oppressor, you could fight it, leave it, rebel against it. But the they is like the air, invisible everywhere, and seemingly necessary for social life itself. It operates through what Heidegger calls averageness, where everything gets reduced to the middle, the acceptable, the not too much, not too little. Exceptional understanding gets pulled down to common understanding, radical questions get smoothed into familiar answers, genuine anxiety about existence gets tranquilized into comfortable clichés. The they maintains itself by making sure nothing stands out too much. Nothing disrupts the comfortable flow of business as usual. Let me give you a concrete example to make this abstract idea tangible. Imagine someone asks you what you think about a controversial political issue. If you exist as the they self, your answer will likely be some version of what your social group generally thinks, what seems reasonable to people like you, what would not mark you as weird or extreme. You might even feel like this opinion is genuinely yours because you have internalized it so completely. But here is the test. Can you explain why you hold this view in terms that come from your own deep thinking and experience? Or are you basically repeating what one thinks about this issue? Can you defend this view against serious objections? Or would you fall back on, well, everyone knows, or that is just how things are, or people who disagree are just wrong? Or consider career choice. Why did you choose your profession or field of study? Was it because you genuinely examined your own being, your own possibilities, your own relationship to existence and death and meaning, and chose this path as your authentic response to being thrown into the world? Or did you choose it because it seemed like a good career? Because people said it was a smart choice, because it paid well, because it had prestige, because it was what someone with your background typically does. These might be perfectly reasonable considerations, but if they are your only considerations, if you never push deeper to ask what you actually want from this one life you have, then you chose as the they self, not as yourself. You let the they decide who you would become. Heidegger uses three key terms to describe how the they self operates: idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity. Let us break these down, because they show the specific mechanisms of conformity. Idle talk does not mean gossip or small talk, though it includes these. Idle talk is language that gets passed along without genuine understanding, where words circulate without anyone really grasping what they mean. You repeat phrases you have heard, use concepts you have not really thought through, discuss topics based on what everyone is saying about them rather than from direct engagement. Idle talk gives you the feeling of understanding without actual understanding. It is when you can discuss a complex topic fluently because you have heard the talking points, read the headlines, know the approved opinions, but you have never really struggled with the issue yourself. Social media has turbocharged idle talk beyond anything Heidegger could have imagined in 1927. We share articles we have not read, repeat takes we have not examined, pile on in outrage about things we barely understand, all while feeling perfectly informed and righteous. This is idle talk in its purest form, words circulating in a closed loop of mutual reinforcement, never touching reality, never demanding real thought. Curiosity is not the genuine desire to understand, but the constant distraction of novelty for its own sake. The they-self is always looking for the next thing, the latest news, the new trend, the fresh content. But this looking is restless and superficial. It never settles down to really grasp anything. It just moves from one distraction to the next. Curiosity, in Heidegger's sense, is the opposite of genuine questioning, which takes time, demands patience, requires you to sit with difficulty and confusion. The they-self does not want difficulty. It wants entertainment, stimulation, the feeling of being up to date. It wants to have seen everything without really looking at anything. Think about how you consume information now, how quickly you swipe, how many tabs you have open, how often you check for updates. This is not the behavior of someone seeking understanding. This is curiosity in Heidegger's sense, the restless distraction that prevents authentic engagement with anything. Ambiguity means that in the public realm of the they, everything is half understood, sort of grasped, seemingly familiar. The they-self lives in a fog where nothing is really clear, but everything seems obvious, where we think we understand because everyone else seems to understand too. This ambiguity is actually comforting, because clarity would demand decision, would force you to take a stand, would require you to own your position. Ambiguity lets you drift along without commitment, agreeing with everyone while meaning nothing specific. Now, here is the crucial philosophical point that separates Heidegger from simple social criticism. The they-self is not a phase you grow out of, or a trap you fall into. It is the primordial way human beings exist. We are born into the they. We learn to be human by taking on the they. We cannot escape it entirely because language, meaning, and social practices themselves are carried by the they. Heidegger is not telling you to reject society and become a hermit. That would still be a mode of the they, just the rebellious version. He is saying something far more challenging, that authenticity is not a state you achieve once and for all, but a constant struggle to own your existence within the unavoidable structure of being with others. You cannot step outside the they. You can only decide whether you will exist as it, or whether you will take it up in a way that is genuinely yours. The question is not whether you will be influenced by others. You will be, you must be. You are fundamentally a social being. The question is whether you will passively let they decide who you are, or whether you will actively take responsibility for your existence, including your social existence, in full awareness that you are doing so. This is what Heidegger means by authentic being with others, not isolation, but ownership. Part 2. How the they-self takes hold. Understanding what the they-self is gives us only half the picture. The more urgent question is, how does it actually take hold of us? And why is its grip so powerful that most people never even notice they are caught? Heidegger's analysis here is psychologically brilliant, revealing mechanisms that operate below conscious awareness before we even have a chance to resist. The they-self begins its work the moment you are born. You do not enter the world as a blank slate that then gets socialized. You enter directly into a world already interpreted, already organized by meanings and practices that predate you by centuries. The language you learn carries with it entire frameworks of understanding, ways of carving up reality, assumptions about what matters and what does not. When you learn to call something a chair, you are not just learning a word, you are learning a way of relating to objects, a network of purposes and uses that was established long before you existed. This is what Heidegger means when he says we are thrown into the world. You did not choose your historical moment, your culture, your language, your initial circumstances. You simply found yourself here, already embedded in a going concern of human practices and interpretations. And the they is the carrier of all this pre-existing meaning. It is not something external that influences you. It is the very medium through which you first become intelligible to yourself as a human being. You learn to be a person by learning what people do, what one says, how things are done. Here is the psychological mechanism that makes this so insidious. The they-self is formed through what we might call invisible normalization. You do not experience yourself as conforming, because conformity is simply what being normal feels like from the inside. The they does not announce itself. It does not show up and say, I am taking over your existence now. It operates through 1,000 tiny adjustments, social cues, feelings of awkwardness or comfort, subtle rewards for fitting in, and subtle punishments for standing out. Consider how children learn to be ashamed. A young child does something. Perhaps they speak loudly in a quiet place, or they express an emotion too intensely, or they ask an embarrassing question. The adults around them do not need to say anything directly. A certain look, a tone of voice, a turning away, a comparing them to other children who know better. And the child learns that one does not do this. The child internalizes not just a specific rule, but a general principle, that there is a right way to be, and they had better learn it if they want to be accepted, safe, loved. This process continues throughout life, becoming more sophisticated but not fundamentally different. In school, you learn not just academic content, but how students are supposed to act. What questions are smart, and what questions reveal you do not get it? What makes you cool or weird, popular or outcast? At work, you learn the unwritten rules faster than the written ones. How ambitious is too ambitious? How much enthusiasm is professional versus try hard? What opinions are safe to express and which should be kept private? In relationships, you absorb scripts about how love is supposed to look, what milestones should happen, when what counts as a serious relationship versus just dating. The they-self tightens its grip through what Heidegger calls publicness. In the public realm, everything is visible, comparable, measurable against the standard of what people generally do. This creates a constant pressure toward averageness, toward the middle, because standing out in either direction, too successful or too unsuccessful, too conventional or too weird, makes you visible in uncomfortable ways. They prefers that everyone stay roughly in the acceptable range, where no one disrupts the smooth functioning of business as usual. Think about how you monitor yourself in public spaces, not just physical public spaces, but the public space of social media, professional networks, anywhere yourself is on display. You are constantly adjusting, calibrating, checking whether what you're doing or saying or presenting is within acceptable bounds. This monitoring becomes so automatic that you barely notice it, but it is always running in the background, comparing your performance of self against the standard of what one does. And here is the trap: you start to think this monitored, adjusted, acceptable version of yourself is your real self. The they-self also consolidates power through what we might call the comfort of evasion. Existing as the they-self is actually easier and less anxious than trying to be authentic. When you let the they decide, you are never really responsible. If something goes wrong, well, you were just doing what anyone would do, what seemed normal and reasonable. You do not have to face the terrifying weight of freedom, the responsibility of choosing who you will be when there is no ultimate guidebook, no guarantee you are getting it right. Heidegger argues that underneath everything, humans have a deep anxiety about existence itself, about the fact that we are finite beings thrown into a world we did not make, facing a death we cannot avoid, forced to create meaning where none is given. This existential anxiety is unbearable if faced directly and constantly. The they-self offers a tranquilizer. It soothes anxiety by providing ready-made answers, established paths, the comfort of doing what is done. Why are you living this way? Because this is how people live. This is what makes sense. This is the normal path. They wraps you in a blanket of normalcy that protects you from having to confront the groundlessness of your own existence. No wonder we cling to it. Another mechanism is what we can call distributed validation. The they-self maintains itself through constant social reinforcement that comes from everywhere and nowhere. When everyone around you is also living as the they-self, everyone reinforces everyone else's choices without anyone having to consciously do so. You choose a career path, and your friends congratulate you because it is a good career. You buy a house, and people affirm you for being responsible. You express an opinion, and people agree because it is what reasonable people think. Each interaction confirms that you are on the right track, doing what one should do. But notice that none of this validation is based on whether these choices are genuinely yours, whether they align with your authentic being. It is only validation that you are successfully conforming to what is expected. The digital age has intensified all these mechanisms exponentially. Social media is perhaps the most perfect technology ever created for the they-self. It makes publicness total and constant. Every moment of your life can now be displayed, compared, measured against what others are doing. It turns idle talk into an avalanche. Opinions and takes circulating faster than thought, faster than understanding, creating the illusion of collective wisdom when it is really just collective noise. It feeds curiosity in exactly Heidegger's sense, the restless scrolling from one thing to the next, never settling, never really seeing anything, just consuming the flow of content that keeps you distracted from any genuine questioning. And it provides validation mechanisms so precise and addictive that we shape ourselves explicitly to get likes, follows, shares, literally optimizing our existence for approval from the anonymous they. But here is what makes Heidegger's analysis deeper than typical social criticism. He is not saying technology or social media caused the they-self. The they-self is not a modern problem. It is the fundamental structure of human existence. Social media did not create conformity. It just made visible and explicit what was always operating implicitly. The mechanisms were always there. The need for belonging, the fear of standing out, the comfort of normalcy, the anxiety about existence that drives us to hide in what everyone does. Technology just revealed how powerful these forces are and gave them new tools to operate through. The they-self is not something technology did to us. It is something we are. And we built technology that reflects and amplifies what we already were. This is why simply rejecting technology or society is not a solution. The hermit who flees to the woods to be authentic is still living in relation to the they, just in the mode of rejection rather than acceptance. They are still letting the they define them, just negatively. Authenticity is not about escaping social existence, which is impossible. It is about transforming your relationship to it from the inside, taking ownership of the fact that you exist socially while refusing to let that social existence exhaust who you are. One final mechanism deserves attention, the way the they-self creates what Heidegger calls falling. This is not a moral term. It does not mean falling into sin or becoming bad. Falling means the constant tendency of human existence to get absorbed into the world of things and people and tasks, to lose itself in busyness and distraction, to avoid facing its own being. The they-self facilitates falling by providing endless things to be busy with, endless distractions that seem important and urgent. You can spend your entire life productively busy, checking boxes, achieving goals, doing what successful people do, and never once stop to ask whether this busyness is yours or whether you're just falling into the momentum of what one does. They keeps you so busy being someone that you never have time to question who that someone is. Part 3. The Call to Authenticity. If the they-self is so powerful, so comfortable, so woven into the basic fabric of human existence, then how is authenticity even possible? This is where Heidegger's analysis becomes most radical and most difficult. He argues that authenticity is not achieved through willpower or self-help techniques or deciding to be more yourself. It comes through experiences that shatter the comfortable illusion of the they-self and force you to confront your existence directly. These experiences are not pleasant, they are deeply disturbing, but they are also the only path to genuine selfhood. The primary experience that calls us out of the they-self is anxiety. Not fear, which always has a specific object, you're afraid of something, but anxiety, which has no object. It is a mood where everything familiar becomes strange and nothing feels solid. In anxiety, the everyday world of purposes and meanings that normally supports you suddenly withdraws its support. Things that seemed important revealed themselves as empty. Goals that motivated you lose their pull. The roles you played feel like costumes you're wearing. Anxiety is profoundly disorienting because the they-self is essentially a structure for avoiding anxiety, and now that structure is failing. You can no longer hide in what one does, because in anxiety, what one does stops making sense. Heidegger says anxiety individualizes you. In anxiety, you cannot point to the they and say, we all do this, or everyone feels this way, because anxiety strips away the we and leaves you alone with your own existence. The comfortable dissolution into the crowd becomes impossible. You are forced to confront yourself as this specific individual who exists, who will die, who must somehow create meaning in a world that offers no guarantees. Anxiety reveals what Heidegger calls your ownmost possibility, the possibility of being yourself rather than the placeholder self of the they. But it reveals this possibility as a burden, not a gift, as a responsibility you cannot evade. Most people, when they experience anxiety, immediately try to escape it, to get back to the comfort of normalcy as quickly as possible. They distract themselves, they busy themselves, they seek reassurance from others, they medicate the feeling away. And the they-self provides 1,000 techniques for tranquilizing anxiety, for smoothing over this disturbing mood and getting back to business as usual. Heidegger is not judging this impulse. He understands why we flee anxiety. But he is saying that in fleeing it, we lose our only chance at authenticity. Anxiety is not a problem to be solved. It is a revelation to be endured. It shows you the truth of your existence, that you are not grounded in anything solid, that you are radically free and therefore radically responsible, that the they-self was always just a comfortable fiction. But anxiety alone is not enough to achieve authenticity. Anxiety individualizes you, but it does not yet give you a direction. It just leaves you suspended in disorienting freedom. The deeper call to authenticity comes through confronting your own death. Heidegger calls this being toward death, and it is perhaps his most famous and most misunderstood concept. Death, for Heidegger, is not just a biological event that happens at the end of life. Death is your ownmost possibility, the one possibility that is absolutely yours and cannot be handed off to anyone else. No one can die your death for you. You cannot experience someone else's death from the inside. Death is the ultimate individualization, the moment where the they-self completely collapses, because there is no what one does when it comes to your death. Only you will die your death, and you will die it alone. and no amount of conformity or normalcy can change this fact. The they-self tries to cover up death. It has ready-made ways of talking about death that domesticate it, that make it manageable, that avoid facing its reality. One says things like, death is natural, everyone dies eventually, they lived a good life, they are in a better place now. When your time comes, you will be ready. All of these phrases are ways of not thinking about death, of keeping it at a distance, of treating it as a general fact about human beings, rather than your own specific impending reality. The they-self wants you to view death as something that happens to people in general, not something that will happen to you in particular. It wants death to be an abstraction, a statistic, a someday but not today eventuality that does not need to be faced right now. Authentic being toward death means facing the fact that you will die, not as an abstract truth, but as the defining reality of your existence. Your life is finite. You have limited time. Every choice you make is a choice to spend that limited time in one way rather than another. When you truly grasp this, not just intellectually but existentially, it transforms everything. The question is no longer what does one do, because one is immortal. One has infinite time. One can always do things the way people generally do them. The question becomes, what will I do with this finite existence that is absolutely mine and will end? Death makes your existence urgent. It demands that you take it seriously, that you stop drifting along with the they and start choosing in full awareness that these choices are the substance of your one life. This does not mean being morbid or obsessed with death. It means living with a certain lucidity about the fact that your time is limited and therefore precious. When you face death authentically, you can ask yourself, is this how I want to spend my finite existence, living out the script of what one does, conforming to expectations that will outlive me while I disappear, having never really been myself? Or do I want to own my existence, to make choices that are genuinely mine, even if they are difficult, to be answerable for my life when I face my death? Heidegger talks about conscience as another element of the call to authenticity. Conscience here does not mean your internalized sense of right and wrong, though it can include that. Conscience is the call of your authentic self to your inauthentic self, the voice that says you are not living genuinely, you are letting they decide, you are evading your own existence. Conscience is uncomfortable, it creates guilt, not guilt for specific wrongdoings, but existential guilt for not being who you are, for remaining in the they-self when you have the possibility of authenticity. The call of conscience is silent. It does not give you specific instructions about what to do. It just calls you to take ownership, to be resolute, to face your existence without the comforting illusions of the they. Resoluteness for Heidegger means living with full awareness of your finitude and your freedom, making choices that you own, being willing to stand in the anxiety of existence rather than fleeing into conformity. Resolute existence does not mean you stop participating in social life. You still have relationships, work, social roles, but you hold these differently. You engage with them as chosen rather than as what one does. You remain aware that you are playing roles rather than being absorbed into them. You exist socially, but you are no longer dissolved into the social. Here is a concrete way to understand what this shift feels like. Imagine you are at your job, doing tasks that you have done hundreds of times, tasks that define what someone in your position does. In the they-self, you simply do these tasks automatically. You are what you do. The role has absorbed you completely. In authentic existence, you still do the tasks, perhaps identically, but there is a distance, an awareness that says, I am choosing to do this. This is how I'm spending my finite time. I am the one doing this rather than just letting it happen. It sounds like a small shift, but it is actually profound. It is the difference between being lived by your life and living your life. The external observer cannot see the difference, but the difference from the inside is total. Or consider beliefs and opinions. In the they-self, you hold opinions because that is what people think, and you defend them because defending them is what one does when challenged. In authentic existence, you can examine your beliefs and ask, do I actually believe this? Or am I just repeating what I have heard? Have I thought this through in relation to my own experience and my own being? Am I willing to be wrong about this if I discover I am wrong? Authentic beliefs are ones you have genuinely struggled with, where you have faced the difficulty of thinking, where you own the belief as yours rather than just carrying it for the they. The path to authenticity also involves what Heidegger calls repetition or retrieval. This means going back into your own past, not to be nostalgic, but to see the possibilities that were there, the choices you made or failed to make, the moments where you could have been authentic but chose conformity instead. By retrieving your past authentically, you can reclaim possibilities that were foreclosed. You can understand how you became who you are now, and you can make different choices going forward. Your past is not just dead history. It is the sedimented weight of choices that constrain your present. But it is also a repository of unlived possibilities that can still be actualized. Authenticity for Heidegger is never achieved once and for all. It is not a state you reach where you can finally relax and be your true self forever. The pull of the they-self is constant. The comfort of conformity is always available. The anxiety of authentic existence is never fully overcome. Authenticity is a constant choosing, a constant taking up of your existence, a constant refusal to let they decide for you, even though the they is always there offering its services. This is why Heidegger calls authentic existence a resolute repetition. You must resolve to be yourself again and again in each situation, with each choice. Authenticity is not a destination, but a way of travelling. Part 4. Real-world applications. Now let us bring this philosophy down from abstraction and see exactly how the they-self operates in the concrete situations of contemporary life. Understanding the concept is one thing. Recognizing it in your actual existence is what gives the concept power. Start with relationships and love. The they-self has powerful scripts about how romantic relationships are supposed to unfold, what we might call the relationship escalator. You meet, you date, you become exclusive, you move in together, you get engaged, you marry, you buy a house, you have children. Each step seems natural and inevitable. This is just what one does when in a serious relationship. But if you examine this pattern closely, at what point did you actually choose it versus just following the expected sequence? Couples often find themselves getting married not because they consciously decided that formal legal marriage was important to them, but because that is what you do after dating for a certain amount of time. They buy houses not because they genuinely want the responsibilities and constraints of home ownership, but because that is what responsible adults do. They have children not because they deeply examined whether they want to be parents, what kind of parents they would be, whether their relationship can handle that transformation, but because people have kids, because your parents want grandchildren, because all your friends are doing it, because you're reaching the age when one has children. None of these choices is wrong in itself. Marriage, home ownership, and parenthood can be authentic choices if they come from genuine self-examination and conscious decision. The question is whether you chose them or whether they chose them for you. How many people get to their 40s or 50s, look at their spouse, their house, their kids, and feel a creeping horror that they are living someone else's life, that they checked all the boxes they were supposed to check, but never asked if these were their boxes. The they-self also shapes the intimate details of relationships. How you express love, what counts as romantic, what you talk about with your partner, how often you have sex, how you fight, how you resolve conflicts, all of this gets shaped by invisible norms about what healthy relationships look like. You absorb these norms from movies, from advice columns, from watching your parents, from comparing notes with friends, and soon you are performing a relationship according to a script rather than relating authentically to this specific person in front of you. Your partner becomes a role, spouse, or girlfriend, or boyfriend, and you relate to them as the they says one should relate to that role, rather than as the irreplaceable individual they actually are. Consider career and work, which is perhaps where the they-self has its tightest grip on modern life. From childhood, you are pushed onto career tracks that are deemed acceptable, safe, prestigious, lucrative. Parents guide their children toward careers with good prospects, away from careers that seem impractical or risky. Schools funnel students into pathways that lead to recognizable outcomes: doctor, lawyer, engineer, business person, teacher. The question, what do you want to be when you grow up, is rarely answered with what do I authentically want from my work, what am I called to do, how do I want to spend my finite existence. Instead, it is answered with what is a good career, what pays well, what seems respectable. Once you are in a career, the they-self maintains control through success metrics that everyone accepts without questioning. You climb the ladder because that is what ambitious people do. You seek promotions because that is how you know you're winning. You work long hours because that shows dedication. You accumulate credentials and titles because those signal your value. But what if you do not care about being senior vice president? What if the ladder you are climbing is leaning against the wrong wall entirely? But you cannot see this because everyone around you is climbing the same ladder and confirming that yes, this is the right direction. This is what success looks like. The pandemic created a fascinating moment where many people experienced a crack in their career they-self. Suddenly working from home, separated from the social performance of office life, people started questioning whether they actually cared about their jobs or whether they had just been swept along by the momentum of what one does. The Great Resignation was partly people recognizing that they had been living as the they-self in their careers and feeling, perhaps for the first time, that they had permission to choose differently. Of course, the they-self quickly recaptured much of this energy, turning it into new conformist patterns, quiet quitting, hustle culture backlash, optimization of work-life balance as just another thing one is supposed to do. Look at consumer culture and lifestyle choices. The they-self is the perfect consumer because it does not buy things based on genuine need or authentic preference. It buys things based on what one has, what signals the right kind of person. You need the right brands, the right car, the right phone, the right neighborhood, not because these things actually matter to your existence, but because they communicate your position in the social hierarchy. They mark you as someone who knows what is desirable. Marketing has become incredibly sophisticated at speaking the language of the they, creating artificial needs by making you feel that you are falling behind what everyone else has, what normal people have, what you should have to be acceptable. Social media is not just a technology, it is a they-self amplification machine. Every platform is designed to make you visible to the anonymous judgment of the crowd, to quantify social approval, to show you what everyone else is doing so you can adjust yourself accordingly. You curate your posts not based on what you actually want to share, but based on what will get engagement, what will present the right image, what will demonstrate that you are living correctly. You photograph your food, your vacations, your achievements, not to remember them, but to prove to the they that you are doing what one does, having the experiences one has, living the life one lives. The anxiety of missing out is pure they-self anxiety. It is not that you genuinely want to do what others are doing. It is that you feel you should want to, that you are falling behind some invisible standard of experience accumulation that everyone else seems to be keeping up with. So they says you should be travelling, should be socializing, should be having new experiences, should be documenting your amazing life, and if you are not, then you are failing at existence even if you are perfectly content with your actual life. The they-self turns life into a performance for an audience of everyone and no one, where the goal is not to be yourself, but to be seen as successfully being what one is supposed to be. Political beliefs and social opinions are another domain where the they-self operates with tremendous force. Most people inherit their political orientation from their family and social environment, then spend their lives confirming it by consuming media that agrees with them and socializing with people who think similarly. Left or right, liberal or conservative, People usually hold their political beliefs as expressions of tribal identity more than as conclusions from careful reasoning. The they-self on the left says one believes these things about justice, identity, the environment, government, and the they-self on the right says one believes these other things about freedom, tradition, markets, security. What makes this particularly insidious is that people experience their political beliefs as deeply personal and authentic. They will argue passionately for their views. They will feel morally superior to those who disagree. But if you push them to explain why they believe what they believe, beyond the surface talking points, most people cannot do it. They have not genuinely thought through the complexity. They have not seriously engaged with strong opposing arguments. They have not examined whether their beliefs actually cohere into a consistent worldview. They have simply absorbed the position that people like them hold and then defend it as if it were their own carefully constructed philosophy. The they-self loves polarization because polarization makes everything simple. You just have to know which side you're on, which team you play for, and then every issue is already decided for you by what your side believes. Thinking becomes unnecessary. You just check what your side is saying about any new situation and align accordingly. The they-self on both sides tells you that the other side is not just wrong, but evil, stupid, dangerous, because this prevents you from genuinely engaging with different perspectives that might complicate your comfortable conformity. Consider how you form friendships and social circles. Do you actively choose your friends based on who they genuinely are and what they bring to your life? Or do you drift into friendships based on proximity and similarity, hanging out with people who reinforce your existing views and lifestyles? The they-self prefers homogeneous friend groups because they require no challenge, no growth, no discomfort. Everyone just confirms for everyone else that we are doing it right. We are the normal ones. We are the reasonable people. Authentic friendship would mean seeking people who challenge you, who see you clearly rather than just reflecting back your self-image, who care enough about you to tell you when you are bullshitting yourself. Look at how people spend their free time. Do you genuinely enjoy the entertainment you consume, or are you watching shows, listening to music, playing games that you feel you are supposed to like, that everyone is talking about, that you need to keep up with to be culturally literate? Are your hobbies actually fulfilling to you, or are they performance hobbies, interesting when you describe them to others, but tedious when you actually do them? The they-self turns leisure into another form of obligation, another checklist of experiences you should have, things you should appreciate, ways you should optimize your downtime. Even your understanding of mental health and personal growth gets shaped by the they-self. There are now accepted narratives about self-care, therapy, boundaries, emotional labor, processing trauma, all of which can be valuable, but which also get turned into scripts that people perform rather than genuine engagement with their actual psychological reality. You are supposed to do meditation, practice gratitude, go to therapy, set boundaries, optimize your mental health, and these practices become another form of conformity rather than authentic self-examination. The they-self is perfectly capable of absorbing even therapeutic language, and turning it into a new way to avoid facing yourself genuinely. The fitness and wellness industries are particularly instructive examples. People pursue certain body types not because those bodies feel good to inhabit, but because they are what attractive people look like according to current standards. They eat according to whatever diet is popular, keto or paleo or vegan or intermittent fasting, not based on careful attention to their own body's responses, but based on what healthy people are supposed to eat. They exercise in ways that are fashionable rather than sustainable. CrossFit or yoga or running or whatever one does to be fit. The they-self turns wellness into another performance, another way to demonstrate that you are doing existence correctly according to current, acceptable standards. Even the pursuit of health becomes inauthentic when it is driven by what one should do rather than genuine care for your actual body and its actual needs. Education provides another clear example. Students choose majors not based on what they are genuinely called to study, but based on what will lead to employment, what parents will approve, what signals seriousness and intelligence. They take classes to fulfill requirements and accumulate credentials rather than to genuinely learn and be transformed by ideas. They write papers that demonstrate they can perform academic discourse rather than papers that genuinely struggle with questions that matter to them. Education becomes about checking boxes and collecting degrees that will look good on a resume, becoming what one becomes when one is educated, rather than the transformation of self through encounter with difficulty and depth. Universities, despite their rhetoric about critical thinking and authentic learning, mostly train students in increasingly sophisticated forms of the they-self. Part 5. Where Heidegger fails. Now we must turn a critical eye on Heidegger himself, because despite the power and insight of his analysis of the they-self, his philosophy has serious problems, blind spots, and even dangerous implications. Engaging seriously with an idea means examining not just what it gets right, but where it fails, where it misleads, where it might cause harm if taken too far. The first major problem is that Heidegger never adequately addresses the social and political dimensions of authenticity. His analysis treats authenticity as primarily an individual achievement. You confront anxiety, you face death, you resist the they, you become resolute. But this framework ignores that some people have far more freedom to pursue authenticity than others. If you are struggling to survive, if you are facing actual oppression, if you lack basic resources or safety, then Heidegger's demand that you own your existence starts to sound like blaming you for circumstances beyond your control. Consider someone working multiple jobs to feed their family, someone living under political persecution, someone whose choices are constrained by poverty or discrimination or illness. Heidegger would presumably say that even in these circumstances you can choose how to relate to your situation. You can face it authentically rather than losing yourself in the they. And there is some truth to this. Viktor Frankl made similar arguments about finding meaning even in concentration camps. But there is also something deeply problematic about a philosophy that focuses so intensely on individual authenticity while ignoring or minimizing the ways that social structures, power relations and material conditions shape what possibilities are actually available to different people. Heidegger treats the they as if it were neutral, as if everyone has equal access to authenticity and equal pressure toward conformity. But this ignores that the they operates differently depending on your social position. The norms of middle-class German academia that Heidegger took as universal are not universal at all. They are specific to a particular class, culture, and historical moment. What counts as the they, what conformity looks like, what authenticity might mean, all of this varies dramatically based on race, class, gender, nationality, and historical context. Heidegger's failure to acknowledge this makes his philosophy seem more universal than it actually is, and blinds him to how his own thinking is shaped by the very they-self he is trying to analyze. Who exactly is the one in what one does? This brings us to a darker issue that cannot be avoided: Heidegger's involvement with Nazism. In 1933, Heidegger joined the Nazi Party and became rector of the University of Freiburg, where he gave speeches supporting Hitler and implemented Nazi policies. He remained a party member until the end of the war, and never fully repudiated his involvement or apologized for it. This is not just biographical trivia, it raises profound questions about his philosophy. Some scholars argue that Heidegger's Nazism was a betrayal of his own philosophy, a moment where he fell into the worst kind of they-self, getting swept up in mass politics and nationalism. Others argue that his philosophy itself contains elements that made his Nazi involvement possible or even likely, particularly his emphasis on authenticity, resoluteness and destiny, his romantic view of the German people, his critique of modernity and technology. His notion of authentic community, authentic peoplehood, could be read as supporting ethnic nationalism and exclusion of outsiders. His concept of resoluteness could be twisted to support fanatical commitment to a cause regardless of moral content. What is clear is that Heidegger's philosophy provides no ethical guardrails. He tells you to be authentic, to face your existence resolutely, to resist the they, but he never tells you toward what end, in service of what values, constrained by what moral considerations. You could authentically resolve to be a Nazi, to be a fanatic, to be cruel. You could own your existence as a perpetrator of evil with full lucidity about what you are doing. Heidegger would presumably have to say that this is more authentic than being a Nazi, because everyone else is, but is that really better? His philosophy seems to suggest that authenticity itself is the goal, regardless of the content of what you authentically choose. This is a profound moral vacuum at the heart of his thought. Another serious critique comes from feminist philosophers who point out that Heidegger's analysis is deeply gendered, even though he pretends to be describing universal human existence. The autonomous individual who confronts anxiety and death alone, who must resist absorption into social roles, who achieves authenticity through resolute isolation from the they. This is a particularly masculine conception of selfhood. It devalues care, relationship, interdependence, and the kinds of existence that are structured through connection rather than isolation. Feminist philosophers like Carol Gilligan and Nell Noddings have argued that women's moral and psychological development often emphasizes care and relationship rather than autonomous individuation. And this is not a failure to achieve authenticity, but a different mode of being that Heidegger's framework cannot accommodate. Heidegger treats being with others as a threat to authenticity, something you must resist to be yourself. But what if authentic existence is found through relationship rather than despite it? What if you become yourself most fully in genuine connection with others rather than in separation from them? His framework makes care seem like a distraction from the serious business of confronting your own death. But care is arguably more fundamental to human existence than the kind of isolated self-confrontation he privileges. We are not individuals who then enter into relationships. We are relational beings from the start, formed by and through care. There is also a psychological critique that Heidegger's demand for constant authenticity is unrealistic and potentially harmful. Human beings cannot live in constant existential awareness of finitude and groundlessness. We would be paralyzed by anxiety if we could not sometimes just function automatically, doing things because that is how they are done. The they-self provides necessary psychological scaffolding that allows us to navigate complex social reality without having to constantly choose and justify everything from first principles. Heidegger treats this as falling, as inauthentic evasion, but it is also a normal and healthy psychological mechanism. Consider social conventions like manners, greetings, small talk, all the little rituals that oil social interaction. These are pure they-self. You say, "How are you?" not because you want to know, but because that is what one says. You smile politely. You follow scripts that everyone follows. Heidegger would say this is inauthentic. And in a sense it is. You are not expressing your genuine self in these moments. But these conventions also make social life possible. They provide a surface level of interaction that does not require deep engagement with every passing stranger. They create shared expectations that allow cooperation between people who do not know each other well. If everyone tried to be radically authentic in every interaction, social life would become exhausting and likely break down. Some level of conventional behavior, of going along with what one does, is necessary for functioning in a complex society. Another problem is that Heidegger never adequately explains how to distinguish authentic choices from inauthentic ones in practice. He gives you the existential categories, anxiety, death, resoluteness, but he does not give you practical guidance for actually making decisions. How do you know if you are authentically choosing a career or just conforming? How do you know if your anxiety is the authentic anxiety that reveals your being, or just ordinary stress? How do you know if you are facing death genuinely, or just being morbid? His philosophy is powerful for describing the structure of authentic versus inauthentic existence, but it is remarkably unhelpful for actually living. This connects to a broader limitation. Heidegger is much better at diagnosis than prescription. He brilliantly analyzes how we lose ourselves in the they-self, but he offers very little concrete guidance about how to escape this condition, or what authentic existence would actually look like in practice. His discussion of authenticity is abstract and sometimes vague, full of technical terminology that describes existential structures but does not translate into actionable wisdom. You can finish reading Being and Time with a profound sense that you are living inauthentically but no clear idea what to do about it, which is frustrating and potentially paralyzing. There is also a kind of elitism in Heidegger's framework that should trouble us. The implication seems to be that most people, most of the time, are living fallen, inauthentic lives, absorbed in the they-self, and only a few philosophers or exceptional individuals achieve authenticity through profound self-confrontation. This devalues ordinary life and ordinary people in a way that feels aristocratic and dismissive. Who is Heidegger to say that the shopkeeper or the farmer or the parent raising children is living less authentically than the philosopher contemplating being in his study? Perhaps there is authentic existence in simple dedication to one's work, in care for family, in participation in community, even if these do not involve the kind of anguished self-examination Heidegger valorizes. His philosophy sometimes seems to confuse authenticity with a particular kind of intellectual brooding that is really just one possible mode of existence, not the only genuine one. Critics have also pointed out that Heidegger's concept of the they-self can become a way to feel superior to others. You can tell yourself that unlike all those sheep who just conform to what everyone does, you are authentic. You have faced anxiety and death. You are living resolutely. But this is often just a more sophisticated form of the they-self, the they-self of the rebel, the nonconformist, the person who defines themselves through rejection of normalcy. True authenticity would not need to position itself against others or assert its superiority. It would simply exist as what it is. The fact that Heidegger's philosophy can so easily become a tool for self-righteous judgment of others suggests something problematic in its structure. Authenticity becomes another way to perform being better than the masses, which is just the they-self in disguise. Finally, Heidegger's entire framework assumes that there is a true self to be discovered or chosen, that beneath the they-self there is an authentic you waiting to emerge. But this assumption can be questioned. What if there is no essential self beneath the social roles and conventions? What if you are constituted all the way down by your relationships, your culture, your language, your embeddedness in the they? Post-structuralist and postmodern philosophers have argued that the self is not a foundation, but an effect, not a substance, but a process. Not something you find, but something you continuously create through action and interpretation. From this perspective, Heidegger's quest for authenticity might be chasing an illusion, trying to find a ground that does not exist. The self might be nothing but the play of roles, relationships and interpretations, and authenticity might be a comforting fiction. We tell ourselves to avoid facing the abyss of having no fixed identity. Part 6. Scholarly Debates and Extensions. Heidegger's concept of the they-self has generated enormous scholarly discussion, with philosophers both developing his insights and pushing against his limitations. Understanding these debates shows us the ongoing life of the idea and how it has been transformed, criticized, and applied beyond Heidegger's original formulation. Jean-Paul Sartre engaged deeply with Heidegger's analysis and transformed it into his own existentialist framework. Sartre agreed that most people live in what he called bad faith, a mode of existence where you pretend you are not free, where you hide from your radical freedom and responsibility by conforming to social roles and expectations. The waiter who performs being a waiter so thoroughly that he becomes nothing but his role, the woman who treats herself as a mere object to be looked at rather than a subject with freedom and agency, these are examples of bad faith that parallel Heidegger's they-self. But Sartre made the ethical dimensions more explicit than Heidegger ever did. He argued that we are condemned to be free, that we cannot escape responsibility for our choices, no matter how much we try to hide in social roles or deterministic excuses. Sartre also emphasized that authenticity requires recognizing the freedom of others, not just your own freedom. This was a crucial addition that Heidegger lacked, an understanding that authentic existence has an irreducibly social and ethical dimension. You cannot be authentic while treating others as mere things, as objects to be manipulated or controlled. Authenticity requires what Sartre called recognizing the other as a subject, as another free consciousness whose freedom is as absolute as your own. This moves beyond Heidegger's individualistic framework toward a more relational understanding of authenticity, though Sartre still emphasized the fundamental isolation of consciousness and the inevitable conflict between freedoms. Maurice Merleau-Ponty took Heidegger's analysis in a different direction by emphasizing embodiment. Merleau-Ponty argued that we are not just abstract consciousness thrown into the world, we are fundamentally embodied beings whose existence is shaped by our physical being in the world. This added an important dimension that Heidegger largely ignored: how the they-self operates through bodily habits, postures, ways of moving and sensing. You learn to hold your body the way one holds their body, to walk and gesture and present yourself physically according to social norms that you absorb before you can think about them. The they-self is not just about beliefs and choices, but about embodied dispositions that structure your experience at a pre-reflective level. This makes the they-self even harder to escape, because it is literally inscribed in your flesh, in your habitual ways of being a body in the world. Simone de Beauvoir used Heidegger's framework to analyze gender in The Second Sex, showing how women are constructed as the other in a male-dominated society. She argued that women are socialized into a they-self that treats femininity as natural and inevitable rather than as a socially constructed role that could be chosen or refused. One is not born a woman, one becomes a woman, Beauvoir famously wrote, meaning that femininity is a performance of norms rather than an essence. This extended Heidegger's analysis to show how the they-self operates differently for different groups, how it enforces gender norms that restrict women's possibilities while presenting these restrictions as natural facts. Beauvoir also criticized Heidegger for not recognizing that some people have their possibilities systematically constrained by oppression. Women are not just failing to be authentic through their own choices, they are actively prevented from achieving authenticity by social structures that deny them freedom, education, economic independence, and political power. This critique has been extended by subsequent feminist philosophers, critical race theorists, and post-colonial thinkers who all argue that Heidegger's framework ignores how power operates to distribute possibilities unequally. The they-self is not a neutral force that affects everyone the same way. It is shaped by and reinforces systems of domination. Herbert Marcuse, who studied with Heidegger before becoming a critical theorist, used elements of Heidegger's analysis in his critique of advanced industrial society. In One-Dimensional Man, Marcuse argued that modern consumer capitalism creates a particularly totalizing form of the they-self, where even rebellion and opposition get absorbed into the system as marketable commodities. You can be a rebel by buying the right products, expressing your individuality through consumer choices that were designed by marketing departments to feel authentic while remaining profitable. Marcuse showed how the they-self adapts to incorporate resistance, so that what looks like authenticity or nonconformity is actually just another form of conformity to the logic of the market. Michel Foucault, though critical of existentialism, developed ideas that resonate with and extend Heidegger's analysis. Foucault's concept of disciplinary power shows how the they-self is not just a matter of social pressure, but is inscribed through institutional practices that shape bodies and minds at a deep level. Schools, prisons, hospitals, workplaces, all of these institutions train you in what Foucault called docile behavior, teaching you to monitor yourself, to internalize norms, to become a subject who disciplines themselves. This is the they-self operating through power knowledge rather than through anonymous social pressure. Foucault also questioned whether there is an authentic self beneath all this social construction, suggesting that the self is an effect of power rather than something that precedes it. This is a more radical challenge to Heidegger than anything Sartre or Beauvoir offered, because it questions the very possibility of authenticity if there is no pre-social self to be authentic to. Pierre Bourdieu's concept of habitus provides a sociological way to understand the they-self. Habitus is the set of dispositions, habits and ways of being that you acquire through socialization, particularly class socialization. Your habitus shapes what seems natural to you, what choices seem obvious, what possibilities seem realistic, all without you having to consciously think about it. This is the they-self operating through class position, giving you a feel for the game that makes you act appropriately for your social location without calculation. Bourdieu's work showed empirically how what Heidegger analyzed philosophically actually operates through specific social mechanisms of class reproduction and cultural capital. It also showed that authenticity in Heidegger's sense might be a luxury good, more available to those with economic and cultural capital who have more freedom to experiment with alternative ways of being. Charles Taylor, in The Ethics of Authenticity, both defended and complicated the ideal of authenticity. Taylor argued that despite its problems, the authentic turn in modern culture represents something valuable, a demand that we live according to our own sense of what is meaningful rather than just conforming to external demands. But Taylor also argued that authenticity has been trivialized and made self-defeating in contemporary culture, turned into a therapeutic discourse about finding yourself that ignores the ways authentic selfhood requires social recognition and engagement with something beyond the self. You cannot be authentic in isolation, Taylor argued. You need others to recognize and affirm your authenticity, and you need to be oriented toward goods and meanings that transcend mere self-expression. This was an attempt to rescue authenticity from both Heidegger's individualism and from contemporary narcissism, showing how authenticity properly understood has irreducibly social and ethical dimensions. Without horizons of significance shared with others, authenticity collapses into mere self-indulgence. Hubert Dreyfus, probably the most important English-language interpreter of Heidegger, argued that Heidegger's analysis of the they-self has been widely misunderstood. Dreyfus emphasized that Heidegger was not condemning conformity or praising nonconformity. He was making a more subtle point about ownership and awareness. The they-self is not bad because it conforms. It is problematic because it does not recognize itself as choosing. It experiences itself as simply doing what must be done rather than owning its choices as its own. Dreyfus also emphasized that much of our everyday coping with the world appropriately happens through the they, through skilled, absorbed activity that does not require explicit deliberation. The problem is not absorbed coping itself, which can be highly skillful and appropriate, but the loss of the ability to step back and take ownership when necessary. Authenticity means having the capacity to own your life when it matters, not constantly monitoring every action. Contemporary philosophers like Ian Thompson have explored how Heidegger's analysis applies to late modern technological society. Thompson argues that technology has created a new form of the they-self that is more totalizing than what Heidegger analyzed, where everything, including human beings, gets understood as resources to be optimized. You become human capital to be developed, your relationships become networks to be leveraged, your experiences become content to be shared, your attention becomes a resource to be monetized. This technological they-self is not just about social conformity, but about a fundamental way of understanding being that reduces everything to standing reserve, to stuff available for use. Authenticity in this context would require resisting the technological framing of existence, finding ways to encounter beings that do not reduce them to their use value. But Thompson is not optimistic about our ability to do this, given how deeply technological thinking has penetrated every aspect of contemporary life. Critical theorists in the Frankfurt School tradition have both used and critiqued Heidegger's framework. Theodor Adorno argued that Heidegger's philosophy was itself a form of the they-self, using seemingly profound jargon to avoid concrete social analysis and political commitment. Adorno saw Heidegger's emphasis on authenticity as a bourgeois ideology that blamed individuals for inauthenticity while ignoring how capitalism systematically produces alienation and conformity. The problem is not that people fail to be authentic. The problem is a social system that makes authenticity impossible by commodifying everything, including identity itself. Jürgen Habermas similarly criticized Heidegger for offering no normative criteria by which to judge different modes of existence, leading to a decisionism where any resolute choice counts as authentic regardless of its content. Without communicative rationality and discursive ethics, Habermas argued, authenticity becomes arbitrary and potentially dangerous. Judith Butler took up Beauvoir's gender analysis and radicalized it through Foucault, arguing that gender is not something you are or become, but something you repeatedly do through performative acts. This is the they-self taken to its logical conclusion. There is no authentic gender identity beneath the performance. There is only the performance itself, repeated so many times that it seems natural and inevitable. Butler's work shows how the they-self operates through compulsory repetition of norms that produce the illusion of a stable identity underneath, when actually the identity is just the accumulated effect of the performances. This raises troubling questions for Heidegger's framework. If there's no authentic self beneath the social performances, then what exactly are we trying to be authentic to? Philosopher of race Lewis Gordon has explored how the they-self operates through racism and colonialism. Gordon shows how people of colour often experience a double they-self, both the universal they analyse by Heidegger and a racialised they that marks them as other, as deviant from unmarked whiteness that presents itself as universal humanity. The call to authenticity can be a trap for racialized subjects, because any performance of identity gets read through racist stereotypes. Being yourself can mean confirming white fantasies about your racial essence, while conforming to white norms means inauthenticity and self-betrayal. Gordon argues for what he calls existential phenomenology of race, that recognizes how racialization fundamentally shapes possibilities and makes some forms of authenticity unavailable while forcing others. More recent work in social ontology has used Heidegger's framework to analyze social media and digital life. Philosophers like Evan Selinger and Brett Frischman have shown how platforms are designed to capture your attention and shape your behavior in ways that make authentic existence nearly impossible. Algorithms optimize for engagement, which means they feed you content that triggers fast System 1 reactions rather than thoughtful deliberation. They create filter bubbles that reinforce existing views rather than challenging them. They quantify social approval in ways that turn interaction into metric optimization. Social media is a they-self machine, literally designed to make you conform to patterns that benefit the platform while giving you the illusion that you are expressing your authentic self. Shoshana Zuboff's analysis of surveillance capitalism extends this by showing how prediction and behavior modification have become business models. Companies do not just want to show you ads. They want to shape your behavior in predictable ways, to make you into the kind of subject whose actions can be reliably anticipated and influenced. This is the they-self, a systematic industrial process, not an unfortunate side effect of social life, but the explicit goal of powerful economic and technological systems. Authenticity becomes not just difficult, but actively resisted by institutions that profit from your predictability. Philosophers working in disability studies have criticized how Heidegger's framework privileges certain kinds of existence while marginalizing others. His emphasis on anxiety, death, and resolute projection assumes a kind of subject who has the cognitive and emotional capacities for this sort of self-relation. What about people with cognitive disabilities, with chronic illness, with conditions that make Heidegger's version of authenticity impossible or inappropriate? Are they condemned to inauthenticity by the structure of their being, or does this reveal a limitation in Heidegger's framework, that he has mistaken one possible mode of existence for the universal structure of human being? The debates continue, with each generation finding new ways to use, critique, and extend Heidegger's analysis of the they-self. What remains consistent is the recognition that he identified something important about how we lose ourselves in social conformity, even if his specific analysis needs to be corrected, complicated, and supplemented by attention to power, difference, embodiment, and social structures that he ignored. Part 7. Living with this knowledge. So you have been through this analysis, you understand the they-self, you can see it operating in your own life and in the world around you. Now what? How do you actually live with this knowledge? How do you navigate existence when you have seen the mechanisms of conformity so clearly? First, let go of the fantasy that you can escape the they-self completely. You cannot step outside social existence. You cannot become some pure, authentic individual free from all influence and convention. The they is the medium through which you became human. It is the carrier of language and meaning and shared practices that make any kind of life possible. Trying to reject it entirely would be like trying to breathe without air. You would just suffocate in a different way. The goal is not escape, but transformation of your relationship to the they, moving from passive absorption to active ownership. You will still conform in many ways, you will still participate in social practices and conventions, but you can do so with awareness and choice rather than blind automaticity. Start by developing what we might call existential literacy, the ability to recognize when you're acting as the they-self versus acting from genuine choice. This requires a kind of self-monitoring that does not become paralyzing self-consciousness. When you are about to make a decision, pause and ask yourself, is this what I actually want, or is this what one does? Am I choosing this, or just following the path of least resistance? Can I give reasons for this choice that come from my own thinking and values, or am I just repeating what sounds reasonable? The key is not to judge yourself harshly when you discover you are in the they-self mode, because you will be there constantly. The point is just to notice it, to develop awareness of when you're on autopilot versus when you're genuinely driving. Over time, this awareness can create small spaces for authentic choice within the larger structure of social conformity. You do not need to revolutionize your entire life. You just need to start owning it piece by piece. Face anxiety rather than fleeing it immediately. When you feel that disorienting sense that things do not make sense, that your usual frameworks are not working, that nothing feels solid, this is the anxiety that Heidegger said individualizes you. Our instinct is to escape anxiety as fast as possible, to busy ourselves, to seek comfort, to get back to normal. Instead, try sitting with anxiety for a while, not wallowing in it, but letting it show you something about your existence. What is this anxiety revealing? What comfortable illusion is failing? What truth about your situation are you being forced to face? Anxiety is information, painful information, but valuable if you can learn to read it. This does not mean seeking out anxiety or treating it as some kind of spiritual practice to be cultivated. It just means that when anxiety arises naturally, which it will, you have the option to learn from it rather than immediately tranquilizing it. Sometimes the appropriate response to anxiety is indeed to get help, to seek support, to take care of yourself. But sometimes the appropriate response is to let anxiety do its work of showing you where you have been living inauthentically, where you have been hiding from your own existence. Confront your own death, not morbidly, but lucidly. Develop what some spiritual traditions call memento mori, the practice of remembering that you will die. This does not mean being gloomy or obsessed with death. It means keeping your finitude in view as context for your choices. When you really grasp that your time is limited, that this life is the only one you get, that you're using up your finite existence with every choice you make, it becomes harder to just drift along doing what one does. Practical exercises can help with this. Imagine you find out you have 6 months to live. What would you change about how you are living now? What would suddenly seem important that you have been ignoring? What would you stop wasting time on? The point is not that you should live as if you are dying immediately, but that this thought experiment reveals what matters to you versus what you have been doing, because that is what one does. The answers you get are diagnostic. They show you where the gap is between your authentic values and your actual life. Cultivate what we might call selective authenticity. You cannot be authentic in every domain of life simultaneously. It would be exhausting and counterproductive. Pick the areas that matter most to you, where being yourself rather than performing what one does actually makes a difference to your existence, and focus your efforts there. Let other areas be conventional. Let yourself follow social scripts where they work well enough, and the cost of authenticity is not worth it. Maybe you decide that your career is where you will fight for authenticity, where you will resist the pressure to climb ladders you do not want to climb, and instead find work that genuinely matters to you. But you let yourself be conventional in how you dress, how you do small talk, how you celebrate holidays, because these areas do not matter enough to be worth the struggle. Or maybe relationship is where you will be authentic, really examining what you want from partnership rather than following the relationship escalator. But you let yourself be conventional in your career because financial security matters more to you than career authenticity. The point is to allocate your finite energy for authenticity where it will make the most difference to your existence. Seek out confrontation with difference, with people and ideas that challenge your comfortable assumptions. The they-self maintains itself through homogeneity, through surrounding yourself with people who think like you, who confirm your worldview, who never really challenge you to think differently. Authenticity requires exposing yourself to genuine otherness, not just performative diversity, but actual engagement with people who see the world fundamentally differently than you do. This is uncomfortable. It creates the kind of anxiety that reveals you do not have everything figured out, but it is also how you avoid calcifying into a they-self that just happens to be your particular bubble's version of conformity. Develop practices of genuine thinking rather than just consuming opinions. The they-self operates through idle talk, through circulating ideas you have not really thought through yourself. Counter this by occasionally taking an issue you have an opinion about and forcing yourself to really think it through from scratch, examining the strongest arguments on different sides, looking for inconsistencies in your own position, being willing to discover you were wrong. This is hard work, and most issues do not deserve this level of effort, but doing it occasionally keeps you from becoming just a vessel for received opinion. Create what Foucault called practices of the self, regular activities that help you develop and maintain your capacity for authenticity. This could be journaling, where you examine your choices and motivations, meditation that helps you observe your automatic reactions, therapy, where you work through how you became who you are, art-making that expresses something genuinely yours, time in nature where you can step back from social performance. The specific practice matters less than having some regular way to check in with yourself, to maintain awareness of who you are versus who you are performing being. These practices are not about achieving some perfect authentic state, but about creating ongoing capacity to notice when you are living as the they-self and to course-correct when necessary. Build relationships based on mutual recognition rather than comfortable conformity. Seek friends who see you clearly rather than just reflecting back your self-image, who care enough to tell you when you're bullshitting yourself, who want your good rather than just your company. Be that kind of friend to others, offering honest engagement rather than comfortable agreement. Authentic relationships are risky because they require vulnerability. They demand that you show yourself as you are rather than as you think you should be. But they are also the only relationships that feed your actual existence, rather than just your persona. Accept that authenticity will make you weird to some people and that this is okay. When you stop conforming perfectly to what one does, when you make choices that come from your own sense of what matters rather than from social expectations, some people will be confused or disapproving. This is not because you are being irrational or selfish. It is because you are disrupting the comfortable patterns of the they-self that structure social interaction. You will have to get comfortable with being misunderstood, with not being able to explain your choices in terms that make sense within conventional frameworks, with some people deciding you are strange or difficult. But this is also how you find your people, the others who are also struggling toward authenticity, who recognize in you someone who is trying to live genuinely rather than just perform successfully. These connections, when you find them, have a different quality than conventional relationships. They are based on mutual recognition of shared struggle rather than just shared interests or circumstances. Recognize that authenticity is not the same as happiness, comfort, or success by conventional measures. Heidegger never promised that authentic existence would feel good. In fact, he suggested it would often feel anxious, unsettled, difficult. You might authentically choose a path that makes you less wealthy, less secure, less admired than you would have been if you just did what one does. This is not masochism. It is recognition that the they-self offers real goods, comfort, belonging, smooth social functioning, and choosing authenticity means sometimes sacrificing these goods for the sake of owning your existence. The question is not which life is objectively better, but which life is yours. Would you rather have a comfortable, successful, conventional life that you never really chose, or a difficult, authentic life that is genuinely yours, even in its struggles? There is no universally correct answer to this question. Each person must answer it for themselves, based on what they can live with and what they cannot live without. Some people will decide that comfort and belonging matter more than radical authenticity, and that can be a legitimate authentic choice if it comes from genuine self-examination rather than just passive drift. Use your awareness of the they-self with compassion for yourself and others. When you see someone absorbed in conformity, performing their role perfectly, living completely as the they-self, try not to feel superior or judgmental. Remember that you are also the they-self much of the time, that we all are, that this is the default mode of human existence. Remember also that you do not know what possibilities are actually available to this person, what constraints they face, what choices they have already made that led them here. When you see yourself living as the they-self, treat it with curiosity rather than harsh judgment. Why are you conforming here? What are you afraid of? What would authenticity cost in this situation? Is it worth it? Sometimes the answer will be that conformity is the right choice, that authenticity here would sacrifice something more important, and that is okay. Other times you will see that you are conforming out of fear or habit or lack of awareness, and then you have the opportunity to choose differently going forward. Finally, remember that this is not a problem you solve once and then you are done. The they-self is always there, always pulling at you, always offering the comfort of not having to choose, and you will fall back into it constantly. Authenticity is not a destination, but a direction, not a state, but a practice, not something you achieve, but something you do over and over in each situation. Some days you will be more authentic than others. Some areas of life will be more yours than others. And this is just what human existence looks like when you are trying to own it. The goal is not perfection, but awareness, not escape, but transformation, not to stop being influenced by others, but to take responsibility for how you are influenced and what you do with that influence. You live in the they. You are shaped by the they. You cannot extract yourself from the they, but you can decide whether the they lives you or whether you live through the they in a way that is genuinely yours. This is what Heidegger meant by authentic existence, not some heroic individual standing alone against society, but someone who lives socially while remaining aware that they are doing so, who makes choices while knowing they are choosing, who owns their finitude and their freedom and their inevitable embeddedness in a world they did not make. It is a modest goal in some ways, simply to be awake to your own existence rather than sleepwalking through it. But it is also the most radical and difficult goal there is, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you into what one is. The they-self will win most of the time, in most areas, for most of your life. But there will be moments, situations, choices where you catch yourself, where you pause before conforming, where you ask whether this is actually yours, where you own your existence even briefly before falling back into the flow. These moments of authenticity do not add up to some perfect authentic life, but they are real, they are yours. They are the moments when you actually exist rather than just being lived by the anonymous they. And that is enough to have some moments of genuine existence in a life that is mostly conformity, to know the difference and to choose authenticity when it matters, even if you cannot choose it always. This is how you live with this knowledge, not by escaping the they-self, which is impossible, but by transforming your relationship to it from unconscious absorption to conscious engagement, from being lived to living, from sleepwalking to waking up, even if only briefly, even if only sometimes, even if you know you will fall back asleep again. That brief waking, that occasional ownership, that is all authenticity ever was or could be, and it is everything.